and thanks for everyone who has joined us today, and those of you who are watching the recording. Let's jump right in. This is the title of our presentation today: From Data to Intelligence: The Role of BIM in a successful smart building strategy. So my name is Lucas Cusack, and I've spent my career following the creation and management of information throughout the entire building lifecycle. So you can see there's examples of businesses I've worked with, from design, construction, operation, etc. Having walked this path, I've had a really good appreciation for the complexity of information management and the large range of users and uses it enables, and also an appreciation of the complexities of aligning data from other disciplines and phases within an asset's lifecycle. But in the end, I got fed up with the tech that existed for information management. So I joined a software company. At the time was turning data of all kinds into digital twins. It was high tech, revolutionary, expensive, and relied on customers who were early adopters. And then the biggest challenge that I found was that was getting in the way of digital twins wasn't just the effort and cost. It was actually the lack of good data to build one in the first place. And that's something that drove costs quite out of control. So the majority of the world just wasn't ready, and there was much work to be done there. And that's what led me to my current role at Glider. So at Glider, we have an asset information model, common data environment, or an AIM CDE, as the industry puts it. It's a foundational element to any digital twin or a smart building operating system, providing the capability to plan, procure, validate, and manage asset data in open formats, to be shared with other platforms. And I'll be able to show you a little bit about that, but I'm going to crack on with the presentation. So a hypothetical question out there, because I know you can't answer me right away, but who knows of or has experienced a smart building strategy that has been value engineered, pared back, or completely scrapped? My guess, not hearing any responses, is that everyone, unless you've never heard of a smart building strategy before, if you've been in and around one, you would have definitely experienced this. And an industry term that I'm seeing more and more of, which is smart building ready. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, even though it is kind of when you do hear it. But as you'll learn in this presentation, we should always be smart building ready. But really, it's a lousy consolation for what was meant to be a smart building in the first place. So as a fact, many, if not most, smart building strategies will fail or fall short in some way or another. No one has ever finished a smart building with leftover cash and time and thought, let's add more tech. It's always the exact opposite. There are a lot of reasons for this and plenty of mitigations that we could go through. But I believe building information management is a key enabler to ensuring the success of any smart building strategy. So how do we do that? I'm going to do that through a story. So I want to look at a scenario that will help give some context. It's obviously fictitious, but was indeed inspired by true events. So I want you to meet Alex. Alex manages a portfolio of buildings. Some of them existing, some of them are in development. So new builds, for example. After numerous trade shows, conferences, discussions with colleagues, episodes of BBC Click, etc., Alex is convinced of smart building tech. Everyone's talking about the benefits. The vendors are demonstrating compelling ROI, and Alex has made a business case to unlock some of the budget and implementation on a new development. You can see everything happening here within Alex's head. So a consultant was appointed who created a smart building strategy that included lots of smart tech and how it could be connected and analyzed. It was going to be the smartest building in the city, and those who would use and run the building weren't really around at the time. So the consultant put into a strategy what could be done, and that formed the brief. There was also a very comprehensive BIM strategy created by a BIM consultant with loads of data requirements that would be useful in operating a smart building. The two strategies spoke a lot about data. However, they weren't necessarily aligned. As you can see there, VHS and beta, showing my age. And then the tender returns came back. So the smart building strategy brief was sent out as a tender effectively, and the process wasn't easy. because the scope, being quite ambitious, would have had to have been supplied by different vendors. There was so much to it, and several of the vendors were selected. However, not everything in the scope or the brief could be achieved, so the strategy was scale back. Meanwhile, costs are adding up, and everything that Alex would pass on to the contractor as a requirement to enable the tech just amounted in increasing costs. So certain things going under the microscope were scaled back, and among those was the provision of BIM and an asset information model. So the scaled smart building strategy, in the end, things moved along. Some tech was installed, some systems went online while the tenants moved in, and the property manager's engineering team were busy resurveying the whole building, as a master asset register didn't really exist yet, nor was the contractor able to supply one. A few months after PC, with some kinks still being ironed out, a few of the other initiatives had to be dropped. So they wanted a building user app that had to be scrapped because they just couldn't achieve the amount of integrations that would have made it useful. And fault detection had to be scaled right back because the vendor didn't have the data they needed, or couldn't make sense of all of it. So there was never really a complete or master asset register either. And every system that actually did have a register of assets seemed to have a different amount of assets in the list, and they were named differently. So it was decided in the end they would revisit the smart building strategy in the near future. But for now, they deliver a building that was, you guessed it, smart building ready. And this is what their data looked like. So we had all these systems, not all of them essentially smart building, what you would call smart building technology, like lights and a lift, but everything that was producing data or was arranged with data called things differently. There's an example of level 2, room 2, which you can see is named in many different ways. All of them sort of tell you what you're looking at, but they need to be the same if we're going to do cool things with that data. And you can see one thing didn't have any data associated at all. So in the end, Alex's tenants were won over with the tech that was installed because some of it was pretty cool. It was a new, fresh building, and that's nice enough to walk into and experience. But the building wasn't what you would call super smart, and they were patient with it being new. So those who supported the smart building initiative with various departments of Alex's organization were asking for their return on investment. And this was difficult to answer or quantify. So technology implementations that were sort of in the process of being rolled out on new and existing buildings got halted, and this term smart building ready started being used a lot more. Of the tech that was installed, a few clever case studies were created showing some efficiency gains, and the marketing team did their thing. So no one ever shares how things go wrong, making it hard to learn from their mistakes. Behind the "we are thrilled to announce" post on LinkedIn, there still was the harsh reality, though. The smart building strategy didn't really achieve what it had set out to. So let's have a look at why. Let's start by looking at what can we learn from Alex's story. So I think I emphasized that the smart building strategy was a bit overzealous. It was quite ambitious because it wasn't really a strategy. It was more of a what we could do. What's a list of smart technology you could put in a building, which inadvertently often forms what the brief is. So there's so much you can do, but to create a plan on what you should do is hard when those who use and run the building don't yet exist, because we're talking about quite early in the design stage. So you need to put fundamentals in place, which is where we come back to the good version of smart building ready. So a building should be smart building ready at all times, not just at the end, because things had to get canned, right? So first thing we learned was Alex was a bit of a victim to marketing and trends. They should have done more research or had someone in the business focus on it. Secondly, Alex should have chosen what's right based on what's right for those who operate and work in their assets. So this forms for your brief and the tech you need. And again, Alex probably needs a specific resource, so someone in the business that's their job to manage this, and implement a smart building technology framework so that ensures the right people are engaged at the right time. And if the right people don't exist, maybe they need new contracts where they employ facilities managers early on for an advisory role. And then there is more of this happening now. I believe it's called design to manage, something like that. So the industry is moving this way, and that's a good thing. The challenge and art to creating a successful smart building strategy is to create something that works for everyone. And that way, everyone is willing to put their hands in their pockets and give you some of their budget. So save the risky unknowns for after everyone's already happy. And the next thing, Alex should vet their vendors. So not a lot of evidence yet to support tech out there. It looks convincing. People might say they want it. But when it comes to the numbers, a lot of the metrics are manipulated. Some maybe even made up. But 100% of them are best case scenario. So no vendor would ever put out an average case study out there, right? It's always their best. So what you're seeing isn't necessarily what you're going to get, or it might not be right for you. So putting an RFI or an RFP out there for a solution that does everything, and that asks for loads of capabilities was asking for trouble, without aligning what you could and should do to what actually exists as a technology. And then lastly, and this is the most important thing, so look at the problems that you had yesterday before you saw that bright, shiny thing that you wanted. Simply put, have you got up-to-date record drawings of your built asset? Where are your drawings? Are they up to date? If you have to install a new bit of tech or refurbish an existing area, do you have the right drawings, or do you have to pay £10,000 for a survey? And if you do have two strategies that specify things about data, like a BIM strategy, a smart building strategy, make sure they're aligned. So one key fundamental that we're talking about today is BIM. So you can't do all that cool thing without good structured data, but you can't have good structured data without a plan or a process in place. And what I'm proposing is that process is building information modeling, or information management, as it is increasingly being referred to. So the fundamentals you need to enable your smart building strategy are powered by good information management practices. BIM, or building information management, which I like to refer to, is simply an organized way to manage the mass of information that's produced in the creation of an asset. And it also applies to managing this information and data during its operational phase. So how is BIM going to keep my smart building strategy alive? Let's look at an implementation example. So when an asset owner hasn't put in place a procedure to manage their information delivery, in my career, I've witnessed up to a 10x implementation cost of smart tech. So that's 10 times the annual cost of the technology subscription just to get it up and running. And this is an extreme example, but I've seen it a couple of times where it's actually about 10 times. As a rule of thumb, you should be looking at 2 or 3 times. But what happens when you onboard a vendor who would use your BMS as example is they'll normally do one of 3 things. They'll say, step 1, they might crash your BMS because it's quite a volatile, not advanced system to be tapping into like that. They'll take a data sample, and then they'll come back to you and they'll be like, what is this? Where is your naming convention or an asset list or something that I can use to make sense of the data that I've just extracted from the BMS, because it looks nothing like what else you've given me. So what happens? They will increase their implementation fee to make sense of the data and align it to the rest of your data and documentation. Or they'll limit the scope, so you won't get as much as what you wanted, or they might do a combination of 1 and 2, or you could just scrap the whole initiative. So that's just an example of showing actually how good information management practices can keep that cost low, so that when you get to the point at the end of the project, when you're bringing in this technology, you don't get shocked by someone saying, well, actually, it's going to cost 10 times what I originally thought it would. So BIM is a process that, if followed, results in good structured information and data. I'll reiterate that. It's not just 3D models. It's not a digital twin. It's a combination of, as you can see here, 3D models, static data, and documentation. So essentially what BIM does is it creates what we call in the industry PIMs and AIMs, a project information model. And so once complete, the project information model becomes an asset information model. And then once the asset information or the asset itself becomes live and the information's being produced or data's being produced from operational and information technology, it becomes almost an as-is model rather than as built model, which is where you're getting into the digital twin territory. But the important thing is BIM creates good structured data that will help align these things. So your models, your spatial geometry, your static data, asset data, all your documentation, and your live data, importantly, all has some sort of common link or thread to it, so that as you add and onboard more and more, it's easier. So you can give an asset export or a room list, a simple room list to a vendor, so that when they onboard their technology, they've called room 2 what is meant to be called, not just interpreted as O2 or 1.2 or whatever. So let's have a look at what good looks like using our Reba planner work stages. We have Alex's organization here. And then what I'm going to do is show the example through maybe the eyes of a business like Glider and our product Glider BIM. So this isn't necessarily your whole smart building technology stack or consultants. This is like, how do I get BIM right? Like, what can I use as an organization with Alex here on the top to get the data that I need? So Alex's organization needs a BIM strategy, which could be provided by an external supplier because they might not have the internal capability. They'll need a dedicated resource to then manage whoever they bring in to do some of this work, or they might share some of that load. So they might have a consultant come in and form part of their team to do some of that role internally. Essentially, they need to create organizational information requirements, asset information requirements, and a method to exchange those and receive those. So an EIR. And they'll need an asset information model CDE. So an AIM CDE or information management platform, as some of the industry is calling it now, an IMP. And then what you would do, the client will put, or Alex's organization will use that AIM CDE to put all of their asset information models for their estate within there. And then on a new project, their exchange information requirements and asset information requirements can inform or be configured to an information delivery plan. So they would set in a platform what information they expect to receive and then validate it. So we don't want to do this stuff by eye. So obviously we're talking about thousands and thousands of data points here. So we have to automate this and get it right. So the information requirements, what will happen? They will inform validation rules. So they'll be configured within your AIM CDE to receive information and check whether or not what you've received is correct or not. The information is then produced by the supply chain. So your designers, your trade contractors, they'll be producing information. They'll be uploading it to your CDE, and then it will be validated. You'll produce a validation report, and then it just goes back. So we just go back and forth until the data is right. As data is being produced, information is being produced. One very, very important thing the entire way through, because we're talking about a very long period here, this could be years from stages, say 2, 3 to 5, is education and briefing. Loads of people are going to come onto a project. There could be thousands of people involved in a large project. Everyone needs to be briefed, and a lot of people need to be educated on how we're managing information on the project, what resources and reference information they have available to them, so that when they produce information, because I don't think anyone's ever going to be involved in a project who wouldn't produce at least some form of information. They need to produce it so that it's in line with the BIM strategy, essentially. What happens then? We get to the end, the information's produced, the building's complete, your asset information model is handed over, the AIM CDE is used to receive and approve the information. The building starts producing loads and loads of data, right? And then fortunately, this is aligned. So if you've done all this stuff here, across here, I don't know, it's confusing. I'm going to show you what it looks like, maybe in software terms, but it'll be aligned. And then you can start maintaining your asset information model, and you keep your AIM CDE as a master record of information, and maintain the information within it. So these steps here, information requirements, validation rules, information production, information validation, and validation reporting, I'll show you what this looks like. So I'm going to use an example of the company I work for, which makes total sense. So the information requirements, these are just documentation, they are aligned to ISO 19650. I have not mentioned that standard yet, but it is just assumed. And we would create these. And essentially what that is what information does the asset owner want? What data do they want to operate and manage their asset? Now, there are information requirements that a contractor would use during the construction of a project. But my focus, being smart buildings, is just on operational data requirements. Next, so we get into the platform here, we actually configure the rules. So there's a lot of information requirements, and you'll see them a lot in Airtable and Excel. And what we do in our platform is we can actually configure so that each attribute is set up as a template. It's assigned a person who's going to provide that, and then the properties are set. And you can even set so that each property is not just expecting a number or something. You can use regex or pick list to say, okay, I've received something. Does it comply with this naming standard? Yes or no? So we can be very, very rigid with our plan of work in GliderBIM. The information is then produced. I've used Revit. Sorry for you ArchiCAD users out there, but just an example of a model authoring tool. So it's producing an asset information model. We're going to receive 3D models, documents, and data. There's two ways to upload information to our platform, but essentially the data goes into this field here. You can drop in an IFC or a Kirby file, and then it's validated. So everything that we set as a rule to say, okay, I want in these components these attributes, and these attributes have to comply with this naming standard or this whatever. And we'll say, yes, that's passed, or it's missing, or we've received something and it's invalid or incomplete. This is all done with an internal ETL mechanism, which stands for extract, transform, load. Essentially, the information comes in, and we process it and then do a report on its compliance. So this is all built in to the platform. And then the users and the client will see a mini snapshot of the report just to show where it's at. We can phase it, or we can build a custom report using something like Power BI, just so they can really track the progress of what they're getting. And essentially, if it's not fully green, then you're at risk if you're going to use this data to onboard smart building technology. So this really gives you a good snapshot of is my data good enough to be used? And then what happens? It goes back to the information production stage, and an RFI will be sent out to the person who produced it, just to say very, very clearly, as you can see, thanks for all your data. These two things are wrong. Can you just input the right thing? And then a report will go back and say that that's good. So we keep doing this until all the reds turn green, and then what happens at the end? Voila, you get good data. So we get something. So we've said, okay, we want to call that room code by that, or the room ID, and all of the technology that is onboarded can use that same coding. So again, why? What are we looking at here? So we want intelligence. We want to do cool things with our data. We can't do anything to support that without good data, and you can't have good data without some sort of process like BIM there. And what do I need intelligence for? So more importantly, why? Why do you need it? So not that FOMO is a valid reason, but your competitors as a building operator and asset owner, they're using it. Intelligence has always been used to stay ahead, and you'll use it now, not just to stay ahead, but I think you'll be needing it to stay relevant. So digitalization is the new normal, and all of these things here are either enabled by or supercharged by good data. So just to summarize again, BIM is a process that if followed, results in good, structured information and data. And with trusted data, great things happen.